Okay, again, for these demos, I'm using different colors of beads so that you can see what I'm doing on screen. All right, so you should be working with white beads and a light green bead. I'm using opaque too. The green beads that are in the pattern are transparent, so I've got different finishes and different colors here, but that's just so you can see what I'm doing. I'm also using that same blue 24 gauge wire that I used for the bud sepals. You should be using white or silver or the closest color that you could find to match the beads that you're using for your sepals. You'll also need some 30 gauge wire. Again, I'm using purple. You should be using whatever color matches most closely to your sepal beads. So before I start, because I'm lacing as you go, I like to have my lace as you go wires started before I start, because otherwise I don't want to have to stop in the middle of my petal to cut a lacing wire. So I'm more likely to do the lace as you go if I have my wires already cut. So you're going to need somewhere around 3.5 inches of this 30 gauge wire. Let's cut that off of my spool. And then we're going to fold that in half so it's ready to go once we start lacing. All right, I'm just going to set that off to the side. Now I've got somewhere around 7 or so inches of my main sepal color. Should be the white beads if you're working from my pattern, from my color scheme at least. So it's already strung onto my spool, so we can work from the spool up until the point where we change colors, and that should give us enough beads to get up to that point. But then I've also got more of my main sepal color in a bead spinner nearby, and I've got my green beads just in a little cup so I can show you guys the scooping method for stringing beads. Okay. Now, to start out, I'm going to make sure that my wire is straightened so it's easier to work with. And I'm going to set up my basic frame the same way that I did before. I'm just going to leave a little loop in the end of my wire so that my beads don't fall off. Now we need 3 beads for our basic row. Let me scooch in. Alright, so I've got 3 beads for the basic row, and then I'm going to go ahead and add my top wire extension bead now so that I don't forget, because I do tend to just forget that. So I'm going to add 4 beads there. 3 of them are for the basic row, 1 is for a top wire extension. So I need to make my top wire somewhere around 1 inch long. Just going to eyeball that, but you can measure. And I need to make my bottom wire somewhere around 2 inches long, and again I'm just going to eyeball that. And we're going to cross over that bottom wire, same way we did before, and then twist down a little ways. Make sure you get nice even twists there. Straighten out your frame. Now you can add that top wire extension bead later if you want to, so you can leave that off for now. I'm just going to put it up at the top of my top wire and kind of bend that back so that it stays out of my way a little bit better. Okay, we are going to be wrapping pointed bottom, round top for the first 9 rows, I believe it was. Yes. Okay, so for the first 9 rows, we're going to be wrapping in a solid color and a pointed bottom, round top. So I'm going to bring my beads up to the top wire, same way we did before, pinch close to that basic wire, but we're going to cross over for a round top. We're going to cross over at a 90-degree angle. So we're going to come just straight across like this. Measure out your beads again so that they are as close to that top wire as you can get without going past it. We're going to hold at a 90-degree angle, and sometimes I like to anchor my thumbnail here as I'm wrapping around the back and to the front again. I'm going to maintain that 90-degree angle the entire time that I'm wrapping around. Alright, so it should look like this when you're done with your wrap. Now at this point I'm going to add in my lacing wire. I usually do that with around row 2. So I'm going to take my little lacing wire, it should be folded in half, so there's 2 little ends of your wire. I'm going to put one of those little ends on the left side of my basic row and the other side on the right side of my basic row. So a little fold in my wire is going to catch between 2 beads, and I'm going to go right above the bottom bead. So I've got 2 beads above and 1 bead below my little lacing wire. Now if you switch to the back, what we need to do, you should have 2 little wires sticking out of the back side of your sepal. We're going to cross those wires so they switch places, and that's also going to form the first loop around the basic row. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and lace row 2. What we're going to do is we're going to bring that 30 gauge lacing wire around the back behind the row toward the front. We're going to loop around the side. What we need to do is take this wire and sew it all the way around just that one row. So we're going to go around the back, around the side, and then down on the other side and the front. and then pull the lacing wire all the way through to the back again, and that should make a loop all the way around that second row of beads. Now for the remaining rows, we're going to lace them as we're adding them on. Alright, now to make row 3, we're going to wrap beads down the side. And before I even bother rotating or anything, I'm just going to pinch and hold that row in place temporarily, make sure that I'm really tight and close against that basic row. Then I bring that lacing wire, 30 gauge lacing wire, around the back side of the row, around the side, and down into the other side. So I can make a full loop around that row. And then pull that through all the way. Now what's going to happen is you're going to have a wire that crosses over behind the rows. That should always be on the back side of your petal. The back petal, I don't know if I explained this before, but there's a back and a front to your petals. The back side will have these little wraps showing, and the front side will not. Okay, so the lacing wire in most cases is going to show on the back side of your petal along with all of these little wire wrap rows that you're seeing. Okay. All right, row 3, we're going to cross over. We're making a pointed bottom, so we need to cross over at a 45-degree angle. Wrap. Row 4, pull that up right beside the basic, row 2 there. And then we're going to lace it in before we even bother wrapping at the top wire. Just pinch and hold it really close to that row of beads right in front of it. And then lace that in. And we're doing round top, so again we're going to cross over at a 90-degree angle. Make sure that top wire extension bead does stay up if you already put it on. Make sure it stays up there, so always check and make sure it's still up there. Wrap around. When you do your wraps, you should always be coming over the front first, then around the back, and then to the front again. And we're wrapping row 5 down to the bottom wire, so I'm going to pinch and hold that row in place, and then lace it in. And then rotate and wrap 45-degree angle at the bottom wire. And I'm going to continue with this up until row 9. So this is row 6 here. Round top. Row 7. And sometimes your lacing wires don't go straight across, and that's okay, just because the little spaces between beads don't line up perfectly. But do try to get it as straight as you can. Just know that it doesn't need to be perfect. Pointed bottom for row 7. Then we've got row 8 here. Okay, row 8 is the last one that we're going to wrap round top. So we're going to go ahead and do row 9. Now row 9 is also where we're going to be switching colors. Okay, so we're going to start out, because most of the row is going to be in color B. We're going to go ahead and start the row, lace it in, and then we need to measure and cut wire off of our spool so that we can start switching colors. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to measure out, I know I need 1 of the green beads at the bottom of my row. So I'm going to measure that row out entirely as it normally was, and then remove 1 bead at the bottom there. And that'll give me enough beads to make row 9. Now what we need to do, we still have rows 10 through 13. So that's 4 rows of beads that we still need to make on our petal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap my wire loosely around 2 times. So we've got 2 rounds and 4 rows of beads. Just loosely around the petal, that'll give me enough wire to complete my last rows, and then cut off of my spool. So if you want a measurement, let's see how much I cut off there. I usually don't measure. I cut about 1 foot off of there. Probably won't use all of that because I like to give myself a little extra wiggle room. All right, now we're going to add 3 beads, 3 of the green beads, 1 to end row 9. Or pointed wrap at the bottom, and this petal's ended up a lot more pointy than a lot of my other ones. That happens sometimes. And I'm just going to twist that down a little ways there. All right, so I've already got those 2 green beads in place to start the next row of beads. What we want here is for these beads to kind of line up together, to kind of start at the same spot. So if you need to adjust your count so those beads kind of end up at the same height there, go ahead and adjust that count there. I'm going to add enough beads to wrap the rest of row 10 and most of row 11. And I usually don't measure these beads either. I just eyeball. If I don't have enough, it's pretty easy to just string more. And if you have too many, you just take them off and put them back in your bead spinner. That's why I like working with bead spinners. Okay. Just spilled some beads off there. Okay, so we're wrapping row 10, and I'm going to lace that in as I get to that midway point, and then up to the top wire. Now, this is the point where we need to add that top wire extension bead. So bring that bead down. If you haven't added it yet, you'll just open up your top loop and add a bead right there. And we're going to be switching to a pointed top now. So I'm going to cross over at a 45-degree angle right above that top wire extension. And I am going to use like my little thumbnail as an anchor here. I do that sometimes with my pointed wraps just to help me create enough tension so I can wrap around without anything slipping down. And I'm going to pinch those rows of beads together right around that extension to kind of eliminate as much of the gapping between the rows as I can. And then we're going to wrap row 11 down to the bottom wire. Okay. Now I usually eyeball all of my markings. I don't really work with counts, but if you are going to be working with the count here for row 11, you need to measure out the full row here in color B first, and then you'll remove the last 3 beads and replace them with the green beads. Filling it out entirely with the red or the white beads first is just going to help you measure the full length of the row, how long it takes to get to that bottom wire. And then we know we need to make the last 3 beads in green. So we're going to move those last 3 and replace them with 3 green. And then I know I need to start row 12 with 4B, so I'm going to go ahead and, 4C, and I'm going to go ahead and add those now. So I've just added 7 of the green beads to my wire. 3 of them are going to be used to finish row 11. Cross over at a 45-degree angle and wrap. And then row 12 there should be starting with those 4C. And again, you want the outline of your little wedge there at the bottom to kind of line up. So if you need to adjust your green count so those beads line up beside each other instead of making a jagged edge, we don't really want a jagged edge on this one. So if you need to adjust your count so that your green beads line up kind of at a slant there, then adjust that count. Okay, now I'm going to string enough beads to finish out row 12 and do most of row 13. Okay, this time I'm going to put a loop at the end because it's getting kind of short. Okay. So we're going to wrap row 12 here. I'm going to lace right there in the middle. And this is the last row of beads on this side of my sepal, so I'm going to double wrap my lacing wire. That's just going to help secure it so it doesn't come undone. Okay. Now again, we're wrapping pointed top. So I'm going to measure my wire, go at a 45-degree angle, and then measure my beads and wrap. I'm going to kind of pinch there right at the top to try and point that just a little bit more. And then row 13, pinch and hold that in place. And then I'm going to double wrap my lacing wire right there at the midpoint. All right. And then we need 4C at the bottom, but I'm going to eyeball it. I want it to be about the same length. I want to make kind of a slant there, kind of a wedge shape at the bottom. I don't want them to go straight across, but to kind of go down a little bit with each row. So I'm going to measure out my marking to about right there, and then I'm going to fill in that rest of my row with those green beads. So I'm just going to cut this loop off the end, remove my red beads, and then scoop up more of my green beads. And you can put the green beads on a mat or something too and scoop them up that way. So I ended up with 4 or 5 green beads there to make that little wedge. But again, my shape is a little bit different this time that I'm wrapping, and those counts do tend to fluctuate for everybody that makes it anyways. Alright, so I've made my last row of beads. I wrapped pointed bottom, and I double wrapped my working wire there at the bottom to secure the end of my working wire. And we're going to first reduce the 2 bottom wires by removing that working wire right there where we tied it off. And we're going to twist these 2 bottom wires together about 1/2 inch below the sepal. That gives us a little bit more support. It also gives us more grip for the assembly wire to kind of snag between these little twists and help hold our petal just a little bit better. And then we're going to reduce to 1 bottom wire right below those twists. That's a little bit too long. Now this time we do need to cut and fold our top wire, so we're going to cut it short to about 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch there, right there at the top. And then we just fold that to the back side of the sepal. All right, so that finishes off the top wire. Now we've double wrapped our lacing wires already. If you haven't, you need to double wrap those now. And then I like to flip it over to the back so I can put my cutters right against the back side of my row and snip off my lacing wire that way. And then if you have a little tag of the lacing wire sticking up, I just use my little thumbnail there to tuck it down. You can use pliers if you need to. Alright, so your finished sepal should look something like this, but made in white and green instead. Now again, the back side of your sepal is going to look like this with all the wire wraps showing on the back, and your lacing wire should only show on the back. If you have your lacing wire or any of your wraps showing on the front, it means that you might have, for the lacing wire, you might have come over the front and wrapped around the back instead of going around the back and wrapping around the front. If you have your wraps showing on the front of your sepals, that means that you came around the back and then wrapped around the front instead of going over the front and then wrapping around the back. Alright, so make sure that you are wrapping over and under the proper ways to make your rows nice and neat and to have all of your wraps showing only on the back side of your sepal.